Now you will be applying what you've learned about mixing tints and shades to your black and white printout image of yourself as we begin your self-portrait. Now you will need to select the one color that you want to create this artwork with. Again, it can be any color, but you're only using that one color and mixing it with white and black to create tints and shades. You are trying to mimic the values in your black and white image of yourself with your tints and shades. So reference your tints and shades handout and look at the grayscale that you created, and you're going to look for those grayscales and match the tints and shades with the grayscales that you see in your black and white image. Begin by looking for the darkest values, your darkest shades, and you're going to mix your color with a little bit of black to create your darkest shade, and then you are painting right on top of your black and white image of yourself and filling in where you see the darkest shades in your image. So you're just sort of outlining, you really have to analyze your image and outline where you see the darkest blacks basically on your image, and then you're filling it in with your darkest shade. So you're painting your face, your hair, and your shirt and shoulders. You don't necessarily need to worry about painting the area behind your head because we're going to be cutting this out. All right, sometimes it helps to turn your picture upside down, then your hand isn't resting in your wet paint. Also just gives you a little bit different perspective on the image, helping you to find, again, those darkest shades. So I'm still working on my darkest shade, looking for areas that look almost black, and I'm painting on top of them with my darkest shade. Notice that I'm using a really fine, thin, small paintbrush. Your image is pretty small, and especially those small details in your eyes and your lips and your nose, you're really going to want to use a small paintbrush. After I completed my darkest shade, I washed my brush, and then I painted areas with my color unmixed, which would be like about my second darkest. You really can get far more values with tints than you can with shades. So you're really only looking at about one shade and then your color unmixed. And then we're going to start at our lightest tint and then gradually work toward those two values that we've already painted. So now I'm taking my dollop of white and I'm mixing a little bit, just a tiny bit of blue into it. And now I'm looking for my lightest areas, my lightest highlights on my face. And I'm just going to sort of outline and whatever random organic shape that it is. I know this looks kind of funny, but really you're just outlining those highlights, and then you're going to fill it in with your lightest tint. The more accurate you are, and the more you analyze your face and all of the various values from light to dark, and the more accurate you are at capturing and outlining those highlights and those different tints and shades, the more realistic and the more volume and depth your image will have. If you just paint your face all one value, it's just going to look like you're wearing a mask, and it's going to look really flat. So really trying to, the more values you capture, the more shapes that you have of different values, the more 3D it looks. All right, once I've painted my lightest tint, my lightest highlights, then I'm adding a little bit of blue to my previous tint to make it a smidge darker. And now I'm looking for my next lightest areas. So I'm looking at my face and looking at my hair, and I'm outlining those shapes. And I'm going to repeat that process, keep outlining those different shapes of different values and filling them in solid. Your grade is how accurate did you portray those values. So I'm really looking for how well did you analyze your picture, how well did you mimic the tints and shades of the grayscale on your image. It is helpful to print out a second image of yourself, the same picture in grayscale, because as you start painting, you kind of need that second image to reference and just make sure, am I, mimicking those same values? So you want to have the exact same printout that you just keep in grayscale for you to reference as you continue to paint. And of course, you can go back. You'll notice that I accidentally put some lighter tints over some of those darker shades that I had first applied. And so then I have to go back and redo some of those shades, those darker shades again, and touch up. When you are finished with this, you should see no grayscale. So we shouldn't see any of the photocopy through your painting, except for obviously that background area that I told you didn't have to paint. You're painting your shirt, on your shoulders and body, and then all of your face, neck, and hair. You shouldn't have any gray space left. Also, you may have to go back. You can see here I'm doing a second coat where some of my paint was a little thin, and I'm touching up. That's going to help with your neatness grade. We really want it to be nice and clean and solid. If you feel like you're not getting clean edges, like your edges are a little blurry or feathery, that just means that your paintbrush bristles need to be a little bit more wet. Now, you don't want them to be too wet. Again, we're painting on copy paper, so it's kind of thin, so you don't want to saturate your paper with much water. You run the risk of tearing it. But if your bristles just aren't giving you that nice clean line or that nice clean edge, dip it in water, just a little bit of water. You can always dab on the paper towel the excess water off, but that should help hold your bristles tighter together to get a nice clean line. So notice that I'm now just putting on those finishing touches, and I'm going to reference the same picture in grayscale and just make sure that I accurately capture all those highlights and all those shadows. What do I need to touch up on and give a second coat? You'll notice in my left eye there, I have too much white, and I'm going to go back through and sort of touch that up with a little bit darker tint to, again, try and mimic all of those values as best as I can, because that is what you are graded on. How well did you mix your tints and shades, and how well did you analyze the values and mimic them on your monochromatic self-portrait painting? Again, I'm looking for neatness, so second coats, nice and clean strokes. Once you're happy with your monochromatic self-portrait, you're going to take a picture of it and upload it to Google Classroom and submit it for a grade. I hope you enjoyed learning about tints and shades as you painted your monochromatic self-portrait.